how do you exist in a platform that you cannot control?
How hilarious it is that that guy who's making fun of the luxury industry is now collaborating with those exact brands, and it's working. So, I think there is not such a thing as exclusivity. Everyone is talking about your brands.
80% of discovery of luxury brands starts on digital, all platforms. 80%. So that's where you have the first image, the first visual, the first relationship with the brands.
Creators are becoming editors and producers, and brands are becoming publishers.
Luxury in itself is not a rational purchase.
So how do you keep that tension prevalent in something that is accessible to everyone?
Without betting everything all on one horse.
I'm Carlotta Rodben, your host and founder of Beyond Luxury, a strategic advisory and media platform guiding top leaders and brands on the future of luxury and beyond. Today, we're going to talk about a very interesting topic with two brilliant women that I'm very excited to introduce to you. We're going to be talking about the intersection of entertainment, creators, media, and how we can actually use this massive opportunity that we have in this space to allow brands to tell their stories in a more desirable way. So without further ado, please join me to welcome Ina Fuchs and Morin Oluwole. So thank you so much for both of you for coming here and talking to all of us about where the industry is going.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, and I really would love to give some words, but maybe you can introduce yourself better. Ina is the head of creator communities at YouTube for EMEA, and Morin was the former global head of luxury at Meta, and now is the founder and CEO of Jisoo. I will let you both give a little bit more insight on what you do.
Thank you, Carlotta. Thank you for having us. I am Ina. I lead creator community partnerships for YouTube EMEA, so covering Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And, I've been at Google for more than 15 years. After 2 years on the sales team, I joined the partnerships team, YouTube. Back in the days, it was Wild West. It probably still is, but we're a bit more organized now. And my team covers thousands of creators across the continents. And it's just so inspiring to having been working with them across all genres, verticals, from small to big. We cover creators from 1,000 subscribers to over 10 million subscribers. And yeah, we just manage them as a community. So very excited to be here and to chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlotta. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be able to exchange with you all. So as Carlotta mentioned, I'm Morin Oluwole, and I've spent 20 years really across the intersection of digital, tech, and luxury, with the core majority of those being at thefacebook.com, which was called when I joined, and which is now Meta, where I focus on product development and product marketing, and then spent the last 10 years building the luxury industry. I now have, over the past 2 years, built my own brand marketing and digital strategy consultancy called Le Vitruve. And it really is to help brands, especially small and medium brands that may not have the ideal resources to build their content development, media optimization, their customer expertise, and how they choose to communicate the overall brand relationship across different mediums that are available to us. So it's a pleasure to be able to come speak and add this expertise to the conversation today.
Well, that is very opportune because that is exactly what we will be speaking about today. Thank you both for making it here, and thank you for taking time out of our beautiful experiences at Cannes Lions to come and have this conversation. To start off, I do want to give some context. Luxury, of course, has been for centuries having such a strong messaging and narrative, and has had a very big control of what people say, how people say it, what clients see, and how and when clients see it. So it is a complete fundamental structural change what we're seeing today in the industry. And there has been an approach of kind of dipping toes inside and seeing what testing out what works and what doesn't. And mainly, there has also been a big shock on how do you get a space and how do you exist in a platform that you cannot control. So this is something that has been such a strong concern in the industry that I think it's very important for us to tackle it with people that are in behind the scenes and in the front lines of what is happening every day in this space. So just to get a little bit of a start, I would love for you to tell us what actually makes you tick in this space. What makes you have this motivation and kind of this feeling of wanting to keep doing what you do in your work?
So again, 20 years ago, so speaking of far west, 20 years ago, 2006, there was nothing. Nothing existed. Instagram wasn't even an idea yet. And so I joined this space where the biggest digital platform was myspace.com. And so, yeah, that's how far back we're going. I was the biggest competitor of Facebook at the time. And what was important, and one thing that I noted, and this is why I've continued to really stay and build in this industry, is the fact that there is a core desire, which is to connect people. To connect people with each other, of course, and secondarily, to connect people with brands. And that brand journey has been something that's really been excited for me. I've had both the product experience and the brand journey is one that's more complex because when you think about brands, you're not thinking about necessarily about brands like your best friend. It's more so has historically been a transactional relationship. You purchase a product. But as we're going into this world where artificial intelligence, which I know we'll get to, and digital are becoming such a big part of consumer experience, especially for luxury brands, where 80% of discovery of luxury brands starts on digital, all platforms. 80%. So that's where you have the first image, the first visual, the first relationship with the brands. And so the challenge that I initially had when I came to Paris from New York in 2015 was how do you, and you mentioned control, how do you explain and share with brands that they don't have to lose this sense of control, which is so important to the luxury sector, but they can own it and make sure that they integrate first their own brand DNA, build an emotional relationship with consumers, and then thanks to that, then they can develop their business, which at the end of the day is what they aim to do. So for me, that's really exciting. And there's a lot of new technology coming in, but I think the core of it must be that human connection. And that's why those brands who focus on that, in my opinion, are the most successful.
So for me, when I started at Google, YouTube, 15 years ago, I always said, I'm probably going to stay for 2 years, maybe 3. And now I'm kind of the dinosaur, when I tell creators, oh, I've been at YouTube 15 years. They're like, oh my God, how old is she? Because they're all like in their 20s. But honestly, it's been such a journey to work with creators. I have hands down never worked with a creator that wasn't nice. They're all so genuine and so humble and creative that I just get a kick of like helping them grow on the platform and trying to be part of that conversation to guide towards being responsible, making great content, authentic storytelling, and doing it for like a bigger purpose. And that sounds very cheesy, but I have 3 kids, twins, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, and all of my mom friends, they're like, oh, I don't want to go back to work. And I was like, I really want to go back to work. I love my job so much and my team and like just like being at events like this, that this industry is thriving. And I can see this in Cannes, this is the best example. Like last year in Cannes, it was already like the talk of the town, creators. They were telling me this is the new VidCon. Like back in the days, I would go to VidCon. Now I'm here, which is like, hey, this is Europe, my home territory. Love it, And this year, for the first time, we have a creator club, which you were at today. And in addition to the Google Beach, we opened this whole new space, Creator Club, and it's buzzing. Like yesterday evening, I had no voice because probably met 500 new creators. And it's insane. It's really the new era of entertainment. So I'm not going anywhere.
I'm glad you have your voice back for today, first of all. And second, I did have the pleasure of experiencing that and seeing the excitement of introductions that you were making with different creators and with people on your team. So firsthand, I can tell that you're so moved by what you're doing and have such a deep purpose around it. So that's Brilliant. Morin, I want to start with you on because your experience is so interesting. 17 years working on the platform side and now working on brand side, not only with brands but also sitting on the board of Rituals, of Britling, and of Biologique Recherche, my personal favorite skincare brand ever. This is not a sponsored ad yet. Maybe on my YouTube channel. However, yeah, so now you have these two sides that are so strong. And I want you to run us through maybe what you see that brands have still not understood, that you've seen from the beginning, and that really would help, go from point A to point B and have this like inflection point with brands, understanding creators, understanding platform, and understanding narrative and storytelling.
Yeah. So if I think about thanks for the question. If I think about the context where we find ourselves in Cannes, this is my 11th Cannes. So it's been an evolution. It's been an evolution, my own personal opinion, where Cannes was a place where marketers came to talk to each other and congratulate each other, and that has changed for the better. Meaning Cannes is a place where brands and agencies and producers and anyone who's really in this world comes to focus on how brands can communicate, how they can resonate, and how they can be culturally relevant. And this is with the help of platforms across the board. This is with the help of creators. This is with the help of a whole host of stakeholders who are in this marketing world and in this marketing industry. And so I start with that because I think it's important to go to where are brands coming from, and how does the creator industry fit in with that. There was this fear that if you integrate creators, you're losing your sense of brand. You're losing your DNA. You're giving someone else your voice, which I think is the complete opposite. Because if you do the job well, first of all, you're going to deeply root your own brand DNA so that there's no question about who you are, what you represent, if you're more of a consumer product or service. So the first is how can you deeply root to your DNA so that there's no question about what you represent, and focus on the people, the creators who are able to speak to that DNA in an honest and authentic way. It's not about, here's my code for 15% off XYZ tea, which, that's the other extreme as to what's happening online. But it's really someone who can speak the language, who embodies the language, and with whom you can have a long-term relationship. And so I think this is really the magic between the brand and creator side is first, do your own homework at home. Make sure your brand is incarnated as you want it to be represented. And don't be afraid to bring in a perspective that is maybe a bit more agile, maybe isn't so rooted or maybe stuck in terms of brand codes, and specifically can speak and connect emotionally to the audience, because that's how we function today. We take, peer-to-peer recommendations. And I think that the brands who understand this and implement it well are the most successful.
Brilliant. I think that point of having your identity so clear and having your storytelling so clear is kind of a paradox, because it's an assumption that maybe all luxury brands have that, but it is a work in progress every time because those things evolve, right? So find that a fascinating point and a very good one to make. Ina, on your end, you have access to so much data on what creators are creating, what clients are engaging with, what brands are creating on your platform. What have you seen is the actual kind of space of opportunity, and where can that opportunity be taking to, knowing all of this data that you have?
Wow. So, I think what a lot of people are starting to understand is that it's not just about the followers, the number of followers somebody has, but really it's about the audience and the community and the engagement. And so there's a lot of micro influencers or creators who are maybe not in the millions of followers that are creating such meaningful conversation around certain brands that it's probably better to partner with a very intimate set of partners, rather than just going for who's the biggest. So I think the search or in the matchmaking between brands and influencers needs to be more sophisticated in a way that, hey, who's talking about my brand already? I should be engaging with these people and giving them more food for talk and more cute backgrounds and, freebies. And I mean, it's kind of easy to help creators create. They are so grateful when you just give them more of a canvas. And we have AI tools now where we connect brands and creators, and we can show and surface, hey, who's already talking about your brand or similar brands and kind of like products, and who would be a great storyteller. But then you also have to think one step beyond that. So a good example, I don't know if you know the Coach kind of case study, where Coach was kind of having issues because it's an old brand, but the newer generation wasn't relating so much to the bags. And they were so smart. They were actually speaking at one of our events, and I was like blown away by their CMO because she was hitting it right on the spot. She said, we figured out we have this little cute book charm, and somebody at YouTube told us about this amazing book creator, and she was writing her book. And so we partnered with her, and it led to this amazing campaign where they were working with YouTubers who were not fashion YouTubers, not obvious book YouTubers, who were then putting the back with the book charm in their videos. And it was so authentic, and they were telling their story, and they were supporting her book launch in the end. And that was like multi-format. You'd see it on shorts, long form, so in live streams and everything. And it was just so authentic that I think, yeah, the matchmaking between brands and creators is just getting started, in my point of view.
That's brilliant. And I think they also announced in Cannes, Spotify and Coach just did a collaboration. I think they've really understood, with Coach Play and all of this, they've really understood the identity around a brand, not only selling things, but also becoming like this identity around lifestyle and what you do. That's brilliant. What do you think, Maureen, on your end? What do brands need from platforms to actually get there? Like examples like Coach.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time having these conversations. I think that's the first thing is just understanding of how the platforms work, understanding how to optimize the platforms. But then on the other hand, the brands also need to be open to test and learn, meaning there's no one magic formula. And even though everyone wants to know, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get X number of engagement, X number of reach, there just isn't. And so the idea of being agile enough to play with your brand, that doesn't mean to lose your sense of brand identity, but to play with the different codes of the brand, and a brand that really does this well, maybe contrary to the image that one might have of them, is Hermès. They have wonderful brand codes, clearly immersed in the world of horses and horse racing, and they play with those codes. They have the orange box. They have, Hermès silk scarves, iconic items like that, and they are very creative in what they do. They do illustrations, they do animations. So it's not about having a big blockbuster ambassadors, but to be really creative in how you express your brands, and they work with creators but in a different way. So an illustrator will come and showcase how they interpret these Hermès codes, which are a key part of their DNA. And so I think that they do so in a very thoughtful and creative way. And then you have the other side of the spectrum with the big global blockbuster creator. If I think of Dior and Jisoo, for example. And so you have this incredibly well-known global superstar who initially was brought on to really expose the brands more so to Asian audiences, but then at the end of the day, who has global resonance, and every move is so expertly crafted, from attending the show to the beauty campaign to what's worn on tour to it's just expertly crafted. And so that's another way of taking the brand creator experience, where you can actually focus on more intimate creators that have different audiences, and focus on what they develop, or the person who has a global superstar aura but is also feels to be relevant to the brand. So there's, again, we get back to this word authenticity. So there's no pretense around it, but there's just taking the power of that person and maximizing what makes the most sense for the brand.
And what about for the flip side? What do creators and platforms need from brands in order to get to that sweet spot?
I don't like the word control. It's being used a lot in that sense. And I think what brands need to focus on is giving the right guidelines for people to go and create, because the opposite of control is complete freedom, but that often leads to like clueless. Like, what does the client actually want? What's the story we're trying to hit, or the emotions? And I think especially in luxury, it used to be all about being kind of exclusive and behind the door and like this big dream. But with social media and, all these platforms and all the chatter, there is not such a thing as exclusivity. Everyone is talking about your brand. So then how do you create meaningful access? And I think that's the key of giving creators input into where you're heading. What's your story? What's your craftsmanship? Like, spend time with them explaining who you are and what they're talking about. But then give them the freedom to go and tell that story in their words to their community, because they know their community best, and they will never be able to sell anything that's not their voice. So I think it's really, the control that the brands have is giving the right input. And that is like key in that conversation. And we don't take enough time in that stage where it's like, you don't send a creator, we need 7 shorts and these hashtags. Like, that is not your story. Who are you? Get on a call with them. We're still all humans. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Meaning, and yeah, what's the back of meaning is human, and that is really the human side of the industry that needs to stay very much human. Love that so much. Can you give me, both of you, an example of a partnership or collaboration with a creator and a brand, or a creator and the platform that you have really seen that they've gotten the thing, they've understood how to work, and they've understood the relationship?
I will focus on creator and platform because I still remain fascinated every time I see the outcome of this partnership. So the one of the most disruptor, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, luxury brands with Jacquemus, who has just understood how to find the perfect equilibrium for the brand, because the equilibrium changes for each brand, between technology, understanding what works and what drives the consumer's eye, what captures their attention. And is able to do so again in a very playful way. So with CGI and creating these images where you say, wait, wait a minute, what's that? But then at the end of the day, it's marketing, because you see the iconic products, you see the bag, kind of racing through the streets of New York, or I can't remember what city it was. And it's something that captures people's attention. And it's also one of the newest ways of using this format, so this form, but at the same time, you still feels very rich, and very luxury oriented. And so for me, this intuition behind how to work with the platform, digital platform, and not how to work against it while still staying core and true to who you are is one of the best execution levels of execution that I've seen across the luxury industry.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite moments when those bags were rolling down the streets, and so brilliant. What about you, Ina?
I was chatting to Hamza in the car about how hilarious. So I have another example, but the first one is the most disruptive, I think. How hilarious it is that Stad guy who's making fun of the luxury industry is now collaborating with those exact brands, and it's working. And I'm like, wait, what? That is so funny to me, but it also speaks to how everyone's finally getting it. And it's about being raw and brave and authentic, and being also able to sort of laugh about oneself. It's like, yeah, he's funny, he's making fun about it, but we're all kind of like laughing about it with him. And I think that is the perfect example of how we don't have to be afraid of what a creator's going to say, but rather see who's responding. Like, what's the conversation? You can't perform well without demand. So I think that's a good one. But um, I recently met Loic, and he is like doing a podcast with LVMH. And Zita was telling me how amazing he is, and she was sending me all these documentaries where he travels to where the bags are made, and he films every single detail of the garden, and it's really such high quality content that is so on brand, but it lives also on his channels and, in his community. And it just feels so, it feels like you're watching a documentary and not a commercial. I think that really works. It just feels like organic content.
I think you can get there when you build that trust, right? And I think also when you have trust in that creator, and also when you have trust in your own brand and you're confident in your own brand, even when people make fun of it, there's a conversation there, and there's a conversation to be had. So there's a very interesting concept as well happening right now where entertainment is becoming media is becoming, creators is becoming, there's kind of like a mishmash of a lot of things happening at once, and creators are becoming editors and producers, and brands are becoming publishers, and creating their content themselves, and there's this whole shift of authorship. This shift of authorship is of course touching brands, but it's also touching the way that platforms are exposing themselves and working. Like today we were at the YouTube shop space, and it was such an interesting experience to see YouTube get into that world, where you're actually having such a meaningful conversation with your audience to sell something without it being salesy, like the QR code that you were mentioning. But this is such a shift in how we see things, and a lot of this shift is rooted in new generations. And I don't like calling them Gen Z because it's today's Gen Z, tomorrow's Gen Alpha, and the next is, it's just the newer generations are bringing such different ways of consuming content, of consuming stories, and of participating in stories. And I think it's not about storytelling anymore. It's about story participating, if that's even a word. But how do you see brands now having to act differently, having to produce differently, and same with creators, with what the audience is actually asking for?
So, I think it's this whole idea of brands as creators, we have been talking about for probably like 10 years. And I've had different presentations back in the days showing them, think about your channel and how you can create content. And I think it helps when you hire someone on the content team who gets it, because there is often, I mean, we're all like from some corporate background, or we've been there, and it's like the bureaucracy and the corporate lines are always in the way of that creative freedom that a single YouTube creator or whichever platform has when they just go at it. And I think, you know, the complexity is only getting bigger with AI coming into play. Like this morning, I was chatting to Matthew, who leads our creative labs, and he was showing me all these crazy tools that we just announced at Google I/O with like Flow. You can create backgrounds with a slider, easy peasy, like high-end production or pre-visualization, and it's just amazing. So I'm like, wow, now brands could create amazing commercials even with real human actors, but changing backgrounds and effects, and it all gets so much easier. I think it needs sort of a mission and a concept when a brand has their own channel and they want to make that channel kind of like a creator channel. And I kind of follow a framework that's always been helping brands to like get started. First of all, I always say just do it. Do not overthink every video.
Thank you,
because
Nike.
more content is better, and there's no such thing as bad publicity and so on. But there's like a concept that I say is like the 3 H's: hero-hub-hygiene. So your hero content, or like your big commercials, or your big amazing video, high-end production. Hub is like your evergreen. You need to think about what could people still watch in a couple of years, what's like helpful tutorials, anything that's like that's like evergreen content. And then hygiene is like, what are people searching for? Like, obviously do the math, do your homework with the data. There's no such thing as great content without a little bit of research. It doesn't just happen overnight. So it needs a little bit of, prep, I guess.
One point I wanted to touch on from what you said, Aina, notably regarding the idea of just do it. Now, I do agree with the concept. And then there's the reality of what a marketer called CMO or executive leader has to manage when they work internally. And this, thanks to the role I have on the board as a board director, there is scrutiny, which I understand, regarding how funds are spent, marketing funds, finance, and what that budget looks like and what the ROI looks like when it comes to actually selling the product. So yes, just do it. But the reality today, and I think this is where the opportunity is, that when it comes to classic media, whether it comes to brand resonance studies, MMM studies, classic media has tools in place to measure the efficiency of media. What does that bring to the table in terms of ROI, in terms of brand notoriety, in terms of EMV, earned media value? And that's in place because traditional media has been in place for so long. Where I think the opportunity is today is to say, how can we measure the impact of creators who have more authorship and, dare I say it, more influence, even sometimes more so than the brand itself, as to whether or not the consumer resonates with the brands? How can we measure the impact and the business value that the creator brings to the table? This is where I think anyone who has a startup, who has an idea, can really build this aspect, because when a CMO is coming and they're looking at the P&L and looking at their line items and what goes out and what came in, and they're able to measure more specifically, just because the tools are already there, classic or traditional media, and then newer media, they still have a bit of just a fuzzy view, or at least some KPIs that are not so clear. That's where, they have to arbitrate, because then they have to answer to their CEO, who has to answer to their board. So that's where this big opportunity is to have tools that measure the value of creator investments. I'll give a personal example. I follow a creator who I think is very kind of cute and funny. She's called Ashley Page. And so obviously she receives products from brands, and then she showcases her real life on Instagram, and she showcases like the product that she thinks are worth the money. And I see it, I'm a grown adult, and I see the product that she shows, so that she purchases, and I literally go to Sephora or to beauty stores, and I actually have that list in mind. But how can the brand measure that? I, Morin, saw this content, this video from this creator on Instagram, thanks to what they sent to her and the partnerships they have with her, and that translated into a conversion in boutique. Today, it's difficult to measure that. So that's where really I think the opportunity is for there to be an even stronger legitimacy to the creator economy, because they are driving sales. We just don't know how to line that dot from A to B to C yet, but I think it's coming.
I love that you bring that business side to it, because it's so important. We obviously talk about creators, and we're talking about the impact it has on the storytelling, the brand equity of the brand, and how the perennity of the desirability of that brand will be. But it does come to decisions of the board and where the budget split will be and how much brands can actually spend on things. So I understand that it's hard to measure it. If you were to give a couple of measurements that you've seen that have either worked or are working today to prove to your CEO, CMO, on how to actually push these initiatives forward, what would you say some of the key ones are?
Yeah. So I think the best business executive doesn't just follow a model. So, they leave flexibility to try, to test and learn and to build. And so that's the first thing I say. The mindset of the CMO, the CEO should be, okay, we have quote unquote tried and true, but let's, put ourselves in the future anyway, because we know that there's a lot happening there that we don't yet understand, or we should see how that can bring value. That can literally mean allocating 10 to 15% of their marketing or media budgets to exploration. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, it's not that there's nothing that exists today. There are different tools that are in place that look at earned media value, meaning what would this translate to if this was representative of a product that was sold thanks to this activation, this event, or this piece of content. And so there are elements that are, while they not be positional, they do give alignment as to, if I take an action or if I invest in a campaign, this adds value to my brand. And so my guidance would be to find the best either startups or companies that are looking at these measurement solutions. But on the other hand, also look at creators, as we go back to the initial conversation, that are creating value. They're creating value. They have an engaged audience. Look at what their metrics are. What kind of engagement should they have in place? How do people respond to them? And then there's also sentiment analysis that you can do as well, thanks to the audiences that creators have online to showcase, okay, is this someone that has a loyal following? Because when you have a loyal following, you know that when that person recommends a product or recommends a brand, this means something to them, and it's not just a transactional proposition.
Ina, and on your side, are there some measurements that you look at when you look at the success of a creator or of a brand on your platforms?
I mean, obviously, the general KPIs, right? I think what has changed over the years is that we don't talk to brands anymore between performance marketing and branding marketing because it's all blurring. I don't think that you can have performance marketing without the branding aspect. And so the views are shifting. I think the tracking is getting so much better. We have launched YouTube Shopping where you can tag products directly and you can buy them. And it's similar in other platforms. So, and then online to offline, obviously, there are so many tools, including tracking, where you can measure all this today. And I think that's where you can, one, hit all your KPIs and measure the hell out of those. But for me, it's always like, is that a long-term relationship, Are they going to do this again with creators and with that particular creator maybe? And is that maybe a phase for long, like how long is this date going? And I think that's where I can see if that was successful is when they just do it over and over again and they come to us for more creators and more brand deals.
And that's actually human discernment, right? And that's like the human side of it, which I find beautiful. And I think there's obviously of the startups that are starting to measure this and trying to understand socials in different ways and seeing how people are presenting socials differently. I think it needs to be mentioned. Oriani, that is actually sponsoring this event, is doing a brilliant job at cracking that code. So go speak to Julian or Yuri if you are around later. The third, I think, part that I really want to tap in is this paradox of scarcity versus intimacy. And how do you click on that scarcity, intimacy, and scale? That actually scale is what brings that visibility and what brings that content to be watched and engaged by as many people as possible. So how are brands actually going into this, and how are brands understanding the way to crack that code and to be able to conserve this intimacy with the brand and authenticity? Morin, this is a question for you. How do you see brands being able to conserve that intimacy, however, also give that sense of access while remaining scarce? Is that even possible? And how do you keep that desire? Because desirability is a tension that luxury essentially sells desire. So how do you keep that tension prevalent in something that is accessible to everyone?
I'll take the second question first, if that's okay, in terms of desirability. What I find in working across different brands, different categories, is that a lot of brands have a lot of rich history. And it's this history that makes the brand who they have. They have history that goes over 10, 15, 50, 100 years even. But the reality is that besides the archivist or sometimes the heritage manager who is literally storing the books or the pieces made by the brand over decades and sometimes even hundreds of years, the consumer doesn't know the story, which I think is a big shame. It's a big shame because if you're asking someone to invest for luxury a significant amount in a product, there should be an emotional connection, because luxury in itself is not a rational purchase, meaning you have a commodity that costs maybe, X number of multiples of what the classic product costs. And the reason why they invest in this luxury good is because there's a story behind, there's craftsmanship behind it. There's creativity behind it. But a lot of times this heritage hides in the museum or hides in the closet at the brand HQ, and the consumer doesn't see it. And so, unfortunately, is not able to connect personally and emotionally with the story of that brand, which is key to an eventual conversion. So, the first piece I would say is take advantage of your heritage, whether it's translating that heritage. So, you talked about Loic, who gets access to these archives and he's able to showcase these products that were created, by Les Petits Mains, as we say, tens, 20s of years ago. That's a creative way to give exposure and to bring to life this heritage. Now, if we go to the second piece in terms of scale and intimacy, and know how a brand can really translate or actually create, it's a dichotomy because at the same time you want to have an exclusive relationship with an exclusive product, then you also have business to run. I think the opportunity here is around content, and I'm super excited around digital creators who are integrating generative AI into their approach. What does this mean? It means that there's a brand story with brand codes. Let's take Chanel, the colors, black, white, and red, or the symbols, the camellia, the wheat, the lion, etc. And so they create brand content, a collection video. So that's a global piece of content. Now, how can you translate this or personalize this to the consumer, either based on where they live, based on their interests? And this is where generative AI really has an opportunity without disrupting the DNA of the brand.
And for you, Ina, what does this transformation that we're seeing now and the scale that we can see in visibility and engagement versus that authenticity of the creator, how do you see it on your side? And how does also AI formats allow for this authenticity and this intimacy to also follow through in their content?
So, it's when you look at the platforms across the numbers, it's scale, right? But then when you're in it and when you're the viewer and you're watching your favorite creator, it feels very intimate. In fact, like when I meet creators at events, I'm like, "Oh, hi, and I feel like I've known them forever, but they don't know me, and it's always awkward. Um, so it's a phenomenon. Like YouTube feels so intimate, but then yet it's so scaled. And I think that's the biggest opportunity for luxury brands is like you can tell your story to very specific community and kind of like closed doors, what feels like closed doors, but then you can scale it across and you can then boost it with ads and everything. So I actually don't think that it's taking away the intimacy. If not, I think it is adding to it when you work with these sub communities and creators.
I love that you say feels like, because luxury is all about emotion and feeling. And so as long as it feels intimate, then there can be a very skilled message. Last question for both of you. If you were consulting for a brand now and you had kind of the golden nugget that you could give them to have the step-by-step of what to do right now to, for the next 12 months, be able to either get deeper into creation, content creation, talking to creators, building creator communities, building different types of entertainment and media formats, what would you tell them? And how can they start implementing now?
So I would advise any brand to work with creators in a way that you build a creator community around your brand. And it takes a little bit of like openness and obviously a first step to like find the right influencers and find the right creators, but then like being flexible and allowing their friends in and then creating a space that feels exclusive, that is where you add value to their content. And it's not just like we want something from you, you need to elevate our brand, but also how can you as the brand help them grow, because you have so much power, so much exposure, and obviously as a luxury brand, you also elevate them working with them, and they're going to be proud working with you. So how do you create a win-win situation? And I think that's a little bit of a shift in thinking when you talk to creators.
Fully. And I think when you talk to brands as well, especially luxury brands, they always, they're like, we are bringing everything. So now creators are bringing them a lot too, and that power dynamic is shifting.
The way I would approach is the first exercise is define your brand identity or redefine your brand identity, because in a lot of these cases the brands go in, they see someone that does good creative work, and then they say, okay, do that but for us. But who is us? Who are we? What do we stand for? What are our values? What are the principles that have made our brand so powerful over, a certain amount of time? Once you have that, then you're able to have that conversation, and brief the creator as to what the spirit and what the essence of your brand is, so they can then plug in their creative eye, their perspective, and their point of view, while not detracting away from the core and the essence of the brand. And I think in a lot of cases, we kind of snatch on to the thing that's of the moment, from a marketer point of view, without doing that double click to say, hey, wait a minute, does this make sense for us? And does this make sense for who we are? And what are our values? And how do we make sure that those continue to still be communicated and resonating, regardless of whether it's content made in-house or working with a creator. And then the second trend that I'm seeing happening, we'll see how this evolves, is the era of the blockbuster global ambassador has shifted. There was a time where you do the ad campaign, you have the big celebrity that gets X number of millions, which is still the case. But there is another door, or even kind of another gate that has opened, where brands don't necessarily need to sign one deal with one person in order to be successful based on their global superstar level. They can have multiple partners, creators across different themes, different markets, to be able to communicate and get to that notion of personalization and scale without betting everything all on one horse, so to speak.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What better two people to speak about this topic than you both, Ina, Morin. Thank you so much for having this conversation, for being so open and transparent about how it actually is working out inside and outside with brand and platform creator as well. Thank you for this conversation.